I thank you, Chair McHenry, and it is what a pleasure it is to say those words, Chair McHenry. The members have been a part of your leadership team for many years, and we're ready to work with the committee's agenda and deliver on our commitment to America. As we go into today's hearing, we should all remember the basic things that we take for granted here. Chinese Communist Party maintains a surveillance state with the Great Firewall and no freedom of speech, no freely exchangeable currency, and no rule of law. But we can never compete with a free and open society that allows for free enterprise and prosperity like in the United States, where we encourage innovation, entrepreneurship, small businesses, and a thriving marketplace of ideas. It's the same reason America was able to develop the internet as well as the deepest and most liquid capital markets in the world. China tries to replicate that. It's tough, but they're working to catch up. And it's through that lens that I hope we can work in a bipartisan way in this Congress to create a framework for digital assets that allows for innovation, provides for clarity, and protects investors in a way that they can understand. Mr. Chairman, America cannot win this strategic competition with China by trying to be more like China and be focused on passing more industrial policy measures. We have to protect American workers and businesses by fighting for a level playing field while standing up for our values of freedom, free enterprise, both here and abroad. That includes doing the hard work of oversight on the multilateral organizations in our jurisdiction like the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. I thank Chair McHenry for noticing several of my legislative initiatives that advance U.S. strategic interest at these international financial institutions, securing America's medical supply chain, deterring war in the Taiwan Strait, and protecting the dollar position as the global reserve currency. Mr. Williams, I was glad to hear your testimony about the multilateral coordination and how that's critical to ensure that U.S. measures on China are effective and that we should be active at the World Bank and the IMF to pressure China to act like the responsible international stakeholder that they claim to be. I couldn't agree with you more, especially as China continues to refuse consistently to provide debt relief to developing countries it is saddled with loans that they can't pay back. Beijing blatantly ignores international lending rules like the Paris Club, and yet, in my view, the Biden Treasury has not been strong enough. Your written testimony mentions the G20 has been less effective and that we need to be realistic about how much we can achieve in that forum. In my view, using the G20 is a feeble place to try to achieve anything significant. And so let me ask you, very few countries have taken the G20 up on this debt restructuring framework that Treasury Secretary Yellen pro-offered last year, and very few non-Paris Club creditors like China are remotely in compliance. What can we do in the international fora by the U.S. to pressure China to restructure their predatory loans and fully participate in the Paris Club?
Thank you for a very good question, and let me just first say I agree with almost everything you said. You made a lot of great comments about how we shouldn't become China to beat China. We need to double down on our strengths. Now, with respect to the international institutions, you hit the nail on the head. China made a commitment at the G20. It's not following through, and we have had challenges in enforcing that. Now, I think some of the legislation that you've discussed here can help at the IMF. I think we need to look at a broader package of reforms that calls out specific behaviors and you know, I'm not sure how you can put an enforcement mechanism into the IMF.
That's the challenge.
But I think you need to look at, it really has to be collectively. We work with allies maybe through the G7 to coordinate approach. We call them out, we embarrass them politically, internationally.
Thank you. I agree with you, and I think you've hit the nail on the head. We need to be working where we have influence and shareholder votes at the board of the World Bank, on the IMF, and through the G7, and not off in the talk fest at the G20. Let me turn to Mr. Lorber. This Congress, I'll be serving on the Intelligence Committee. I look forward to working with my good friend from Connecticut, Jim Himes, also a member of this committee, to serve as the ranking member of Intel. You were at the Treasury. Can you help me understand where the gaps from your point of view are on economic intelligence and data gathering related to China and China's economic success, failure, transparency on the data that we get about China?
Thanks. It's a great question, and I realize I only have a few seconds left.
And you can submit your answer in writing.
Okay. Thank you,
Let
Al.
me do that. And Mr. Chairman, before I yield back, let me ask unanimous consent to enter in a record an opinion piece I wrote in The Hill in 2019 called Build Back Nuclear.
Without objection, and thank you for working with me on that nuclear bill. Continue to work with me on that nuclear bill.